Welcome to Power, Policy, and Progress, the podcast where politics, policies, and the stories shaping our future take center stage. I'm Madison Maynard. So, we will begin with the breaking details of the Trump administration's highly controversial preliminary peace agreement aimed at ending the war with Iran. We will look at the immediate economic relief heading to Tehran, the planned $300 billion reconstruction fund, and the intense pushback the deal is already receiving from American allies and lawmakers. Then we turn to the domestic political battlefield, where the fallout from Tuesday's high stake primary runoffs continue to shake up both parties. In Georgia, voters delivered a striking split decision, completely bypassing the president's endorsement in the governor's race, while handing a hardline conservative and multiple hardline conservatives decisive victories in key Senate matchups. We will also report on the escalating legal and civil rights battles across the South, where newly redrawn Republican congressional maps have successfully dismantled longstanding Black majority voting districts in Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee. And finally, we look at the growing ideological rifts that are happening within the Democratic Party. We will take you to a fiercely contested House primary in New York City, where the war in Gaza has become the central issue. And we will follow that story with a look at Hillary Clinton's blunt take on the 2024 election, calling Joe Biden's reelection bid a quote unquote terrible mistake for the nation. All of that and more coming up on Power, Policy, and Progress. So let's get right into it. So the White House has pulled back the curtain on a stunning and highly controversial memo of understanding aimed at ending the war with Iran. The text was disclosed by a senior U.S. official under a conditional agreement of immunity. It sets an ambitious 60-day deadline to hammer out a final deal. Speaking from the G7 summit in France, President Trump forcefully defended the agreement, launching into a fiery tirade comparing his deal to the 2015 Obama administration pact, claiming that his version is vastly superior. Of course, he says that. Of course, he says that. However, critics, including former Vice President Mike Pence, are already slamming it as a dangerous and ill advised lifeline to Tehran. The leaked text highlights three major flashpoints. First are the immediate concessions to Iran. The United States has agreed to lift its naval blockage within 30 days and grant immediate treasury waivers for Iranian oil exports. Even more staggering to critics, Iran gets immediate access to over $24 billion in frozen assets before the final nuclear talks even begin, stripping the U.S. of its heaviest economic leverage. Second is the $300 billion question. The text outlines the massive international fund for Iran's economic reconstruction. President Trump insists not a single American dollar into it, suggesting Gulf states and private investors will, because United States military strikes damage the country so badly. And finally, there are massive loopholes regarding regional security. On the nuclear front, Iran is only required to dilute its highly enriched uranium on site rather than shipping it out of the country. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz will reopen, but the text says it will be free of charge for 60 days only, leaving the door open for Iran to charge transit fees later. Furthermore, while the deal mandates a ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon, neither Israel nor Hezbollah have signed the agreement, and both say they won't be bound by it. President Trump remains characteristically volatile about the outcome, warning that if a final deal isn't reached in 60 days, the United States will go right back to bombing. Yes, he said that. Insane. The formal signing is scheduled for tomorrow in Switzerland. So I can say this right now. If a final deal isn't reached in the 60 days and the United States goes right back to bombing, as Trump promised, if that were to happen, it is going to continue to have a negative impact on the Republican Party for years to come. It will affect 2026 midterms, and it will affect 2028 for the Republican Party. When the Republican Party, specifically Donald Trump, promised no new wars, no more conflicts across the globe, and then that promise isn't kept, and so many people voted for Republicans and voted for Trump because of that promise, because millions and millions of Americans did not want billions and billions of their taxpayer dollars to be spent on global conflicts across the world. They just didn't. And that is why many people voted for President Trump and why many people voted for Republicans in 2024. But when you don't keep that promise, and if 60 days pass and there isn't a final deal that's signed, and the United States just goes right back to bombing Middle Eastern countries and supports Israel and their military operation to do the same, it is not going to be good for Republicans in the midterm elections, nor 2028. This is also going to impact those who are looking to run for president on the Republican side, such as J.D. Vance, our vice president, and Marco Rubio, our secretary of state. They are definitely looking to run for president in 2028, and they are very much attached to this administration. Even within the Republican Party, they are considered the front runners for president of the United States. So this war is heavily attached to this administration, and I don't think that's going to be wise of the Republican Party to continue this conflict. And their two front runners for the Republican primary, J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, are heavily attached to that war. Because in 2028, when they look at a J.D. Vance running for president, when they look at Marco Rubio running for president, and they talk about their record within the Trump administration, there are going to be people asking, well, you were a part of the administration that caused us to go into this war of Iran for multiple months, which raised the price of gas, raised the price of utilities, raised the price of living. So what are you going to do differently, Vance? What are you going to do differently, Rubio? And they have to answer for that. And if they don't answer in the correct way, it's not going to be good for them in 2028 at all. And especially for J.D. Vance, he has been doing a lot of press because he wrote a book, which, why does he have time to write a book as vice president? That's what I'm trying to figure out. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But besides that, because he wrote this book, he's been doing a lot of press. And he has been defending this deal that Trump, and Iran agreed to, this preliminary peace agreement. Vance has been a staunch supporter of this deal and has gone to multiple news shows on Fox News. He went on The View. He went on CNN. He went on a whole press tour from morning to night. Literally, this was just on Tuesday. And he had to defend this deal. And he has been defending this deal. And is being critical of critics of this deal. And this deal is controversial. So you also have J.D. Vance, who is definitely going to run for president in 2028. And if this deal doesn't actually lead to a permanent ceasefire and a final deal isn't reached, and J.D. Vance was all across New York City to different news shows defending this deal that ended up being a flop, he's going to also have to answer for that in 2028. So this whole thing is not a good move strategically for the Republican Party if they want to remain in power in the midterms and want to win in 2028. They should hope that they reach a final deal for their political futures. And that's my opinion on that. So I will keep updating you all on this because this is very important, and I'm really focusing on how the war is going to impact the Republican Party in future elections, because it will. So now let's turn to the high stakes political news from Tuesday's primary runoffs, where Georgia voters have delivered a highly mixed message to the White House. So, in the night's biggest upset for MAGA, President Trump's hand-picked candidate for Georgia Governor, Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, was defeated. The race ended up going to Rick Jackson, who is a wealthy healthcare executive and a political outsider. Jackson was outspending Jones by more than double in a combined $162 million primary blitz. Jackson pitched himself as a candidate who embraces Trumpism, but with a, quote, Southern tone, proving that massive personal wealth can still outshine a presidential endorsement. It wasn't a total loss for President Trump, however. There were Trump-backed candidates who did sweep 3 major Senate primaries on Tuesday. In Alabama, Representative Barry Moore advanced, while Representative Kevin Hern secured the nomination in Oklahoma. But the crown jewel for the administration came in Georgia's Senate race. Hardline immigration conservative Representative Mike Collins won his primary runoff, and he is now locked in for an incredibly expensive November showdown against incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff. Political analysis note that Ossoff actually got the opponent that he wanted. While the establishment favorite, Derek Dooley, held strong appeal in the crucial Atlanta suburbs, Collins' strength lies primarily in rural Georgia. Ossoff wasted no time going on the attack on Tuesday night, labeling Collins an extremist, while Collins fired back, calling the incumbent a far-left liberal, like that's so offensive, who is weak on immigration and crime. Finally, Georgia voters delivered a quiet rebuke to 2020 election deniers. In the race for Secretary of State, Tim Fleming, a former aide to Governor Brian Kemp, defeated Vernon Jones, an election denier who was heavily aligned with the president's camp. So the results leave us with complex takeaways. Trump's grip on conservative Senate primaries remains unbreakable, but Georgia Republicans have proven once again that they are entirely willing to defy the president when it comes to the governor's mansion. So for most cases, Trump's endorsement helps candidates win in primaries. It just does. However, when it comes to the general election, I do not believe that those candidates who end up winning the primary and they're going to have to face the Democrat, I do not think that those candidates will win against the Democratic candidates because President Trump always endorses the weaker candidate. Always. Like, he's like, I'm a weak president, so I'm going to endorse the weakest candidate in Senate primary elections and House primary elections. That's just what Trump is going to do. It just is. And political analysis, they noted that the Ossoff campaign sees Collins as an easy opponent to win against in the general election when it comes to the Senate seat in Georgia. Similarly to how political analysis noted that the Talarico campaign sees Ken Paxton as an easy opponent to win against in the Senate primary, in the Senate general election, in Texas, right? So political analysis are seeing this. They are seeing that Democrats feel very strongly about going against Trump-endorsed candidates. Even though Trump-endorsed candidates are winning the primaries, that does not mean that they are a strong candidate to face an actual strong candidate on the Democratic side in the general election in November. So Democrats are, applauding when Trump endorses a candidate. They want Trump to endorse a candidate because if that candidate ends up winning, the Democratic Party feels better about their chances of winning. So I guess, keep endorsing Trump. Keep endorsing Donald Trump, keep endorsing in these primaries. And, Democrats are going to feel really happy about that because we see time and time again, Trump is endorsing the morally corrupt white guy who is most likely not as qualified as the individual on the Democratic side. So I understand why Democrats are happy with their opponents in the general election, because obviously the goal of the Democratic Party is for a blue wave to happen and for Democrats to take the House and the Senate. So if they see a chance to win over independent voters, because those independents don't want to vote for a morally corrupt Republican candidate, they are most likely to vote for the Democrat. Obviously, Democrats are going to be happy about that. If they have a chance to win more independents or win over even some Republicans who are not satisfied with the Republican option, the Republican nominee, the Democrats are obviously going to be happy and satisfied with that, and they feel that they have a chance to win. So we'll see if that ends up working out for them. The Republican Party is popular amongst itself, but as I talked about in the last episode of this podcast, the support of the president in the Republican Party is around 79%, but you would think it's like you would think it would be like 95%, right? Because of the let's just get behind Trump no matter what energy the Republican Party has, you would think that it would be like 95%, but it's not. And I think that it's going down. So today it's going to be 79% of Republicans support the president. But I think especially if a final deal is reached when it comes to the war in Iran, I think it's going to get lower. And the lower the popularity is of the president, the lower the popularity is of the Republican Party at large. So I understand why Democrats could feel confident. But next up, we're going to talk about what really is going to be damaging for Democrats when it comes to the midterms, which is the redistricting efforts that have been incredibly successful, unfortunately. So let's get right into that. Following a Supreme Court decision in late April that weakened the Voting Rights Act, Republican-led legislatures across the South have moved swiftly to redraw congressional maps. The sudden wave of redistricting has reshaped the electoral landscape in 3 southern states, dissolving majority Black districts and drawing intense criticism from Black Democrats who accuse conservatives of intentionally diluting their voting power. Republicans maintain that the changes are strictly aimed at gaining a partisan advantage rather than focusing on race. However, voting in the South remains highly racially polarized, meaning these adjustments directly impact reliably Democratic areas. In Louisiana, where Black residents make up about 1/3 of the total population, lawmakers dismantled the 6th congressional district. This newly created Black majority seat, which included the state capital of Baton Rouge, has had its Black population redistributed across 5 separate districts. So the state's only remaining Black majority seat is in the New Orleans area now. Meanwhile, in Alabama, where more than 1 in 4 residents are Black, the state has reverted to a map that eliminates one of its 2 Black voting strongholds. A federal court had previously ordered the state to maintain a 2nd Black majority district, a seat won in 2024 by Democrat Shamari Figures, following the High Court's recent ruling. Alabama successfully petitioned to use a map that places the coastal city of Mobile into a single Republican-leaning district. This leaves Alabama with just 1 Black majority district centered around Selma and Birmingham. Tennessee became the first state to pass a new map after the ruling, targeting its only Black majority seat, the 9th congressional district in Memphis. More than half of Tennessee's Black population lives in the Memphis area, which has now been split into 3 separate districts. As a result, Tennessee no longer has a single Black majority congressional district. The district's long-term representative, Democrat Steve Cohen, announced that he will not seek re-election following the change. While Louisiana, Alabama and Tennessee have finalized their new boundaries, Georgia Republicans abruptly halted similar redistricting plans during a special legislative session yesterday, keeping their current map in place through the 2028 election cycle. Legal experts state that these new boundaries are expected to significantly alter the balance of power in the House of Representatives ahead of the upcoming midterm. So Republicans are pushing to redraw congressional maps in these southern states because they know the power of the Black vote. They understand the power of the Black vote, and specifically how it benefits the Democratic Party. And they want to eliminate that. Republicans know they are losing popularity among the American people right now. President Trump has a 39% approval rating. He has a historic low approval rating. He has a disapproval rating of 58%. And a lot of congressional Republicans have not broken away from the president. They have not broken away from this unpopular administration. And since the Republicans knew that the midterms were going to go blue because of President Trump's unpopular presidency, specifically because of the Iran war and a variety of other reasons, and all of the promises that he said during the campaign trail 2024 that he has broken repeatedly, they knew that targeting Black majority districts and eliminating them would be the only way to get victories in November. That was the only way for them to possibly be victorious in November. So they were like, let's use the Black community as the scapegoat and let's completely eliminate all of these Black majority districts and turn them into Republican congressional seats so that we can win. Let's not win because we have the best candidates. Let's win by redrawing districts and eliminating the Black voice in elections. It's honestly sickening and it's really sad. And I just also want to say, you're going to hear Republicans say, and you probably have already heard Republicans say, you're going to hear them say, well, it's racist to have Black majority districts, and it's just so wrong to have Black majority districts and to draw maps based on race. This is not what Martin Luther King would have wanted, you know, the whole spiel. And that is why the Supreme Court voted to overturn the Voting Rights Act. It's racist, and it's racist to draw districts based on race, and it's just so horrible and it's so wrong. And that's the argument that Republican pundits are going to make on TV, or Republican politicians are going to make. That is racist to do this. It's racist to have Black majority districts, right? But there is an actual reason as to why it's crucial to have Black majority districts. And I'm going to explain that to you right now. Black majority districts are a critical safeguard against vote dilution, ensuring that concentrated minority populations are not cracked across multiple districts. This was mandated by the Voting Rights Act in areas with racially polarized voting. And these districts guarantee marginalized communities a realistic opportunity to elect representatives who prioritize their specific needs. Ultimately, protecting these districts prevents the neutralization of minority political power and ensures diverse representation at both the state and federal level. That is why it is important to have Black majority districts, specifically in the South. But once again, the Republican Party, to get what they want, they have to eliminate the Black vote to get what they want in November. It's horrible. And like I said last week on this podcast, how come Black people are the only people that aren't allowed to have a majority district? We're the only race that we're not allowed to have that right. It's racist for Black majority districts. Are you serious? Are you kidding me? So it's a shame that this has happened, and we will follow if this will impact the midterms this year specifically. A lot of legal scholars are saying that it will. So we'll follow this closely and see, and especially in the months leading up to November, and we'll see how this impacts whether the Republicans actually are victorious in the House and the Senate or not. So it's such a shame that this has happened. But we're going to move on to a highly contentious Democratic primary race in New York City. And it is spotlighting deep political and generational divisions within the American Jewish community over the war in Gaza. So incumbent Representative Dan Goldman, who identifies as a liberal Zionist and a former federal prosecutor who served as legal counsel in the 2019 Trump impeachment inquiry, is facing a formidable primary challenge from Brad Lander, who is a former mayoral candidate. The contest is unfolding in New York's 10th congressional district, which spans Lower Manhattan and Brownstone, Brooklyn. Demographically, the 10th congressional district is one of the most progressive areas in the country, and approximately 24% of its electorate is Jewish. The stark ideological divide between the two candidates was fully on display during a recent Sunday in Manhattan. Representative Goldman marched in the annual Israel Day parade alongside other elected officials. Meanwhile, Lander chose not to participate, opting instead to campaign in the East Village with volunteers from Jewish for Racial and Economic Justice, a left-leaning group that has backed accusations that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. Lander has centered much of his campaign on Goldman's defense of Israel, which largely reflects the transitional. Lander has centered much of his campaign on Goldman's defense of Israel, which largely reflects the traditional bipartisan consensus in Washington, pointing to data from the Pew Research Center showing that 80% of Democrats and Democrat-leaning independents hold critical views of Israel's actions. Lander argues that Goldman is fundamentally out of touch with his constituents. Lander has publicly called Israel's military campaign a genocide, characterized his treatment of Palestinians as apartheid, pledged to reject money for pro-Israel lobbying groups, and urged the federal government to halt military aid to the country. Representative Goldman, who is matching all campaign donations to counter the challenge, has expressed frustration with the focus on foreign policy, calling it a distraction from domestic issues like affordability, immigration, and the actions of the Trump administration. While Goldman has voted against new military aid package increases since 2024, he opposes a full ban on assistance, stating that funding provides critical diplomatic leverage. Goldman has strongly rejected the term genocide and has defended his relationship with groups like AIPAC, which is American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Lander has gained significant momentum, partly due to an endorsement from progressive Mayor Zohran Mamdani. While official polling data remains limited, early indicators suggest Lander has established a meaningful lead, signaling a potential shift in the political landscape for one of the nation's most prominent Jewish majority congressional districts. So this race shows that the Democratic Party in Washington has to make a decision about their stance on Israel. I mean, Israel is not very popular in the United States right now, and the popularity for Israel in the United States has reached historic lows, with roughly 60% of Americans viewing Israel unfavorably. And for the first time in decades, a greater share of United States adults sympathize more with Palestinians, 41%, than with Israelis, 36%, right? And over 50% of Americans hold an unfavorable view of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, though a slight majority still hold a favorable view of the Israeli people. So, but still, overall, when it comes to the state of Israel and the government, they're not very popular right now in the United States. And the Democratic Party in Washington has to grapple with that. And they now need to be more critical of the Israeli government, and they need to be more critical of the United States' relationship with the Israeli government, as billions of our taxpayer dollars are going to their government to commit genocide on the Palestinians and for them, Israel, to bomb their neighboring countries in the Middle East. So the Democratic Party in Washington has to be strategic when it comes to their stance on Israel, and I don't think that they are right now. I really don't. And Goldman labeling himself as a Zionist is not a great move. The term Zionism has a lot of negative connotations to it, understandably so, right? I mean, who are the ones who are advocating against the Palestinian population, advocating against their rights, support their displacement, support their disenfranchisement? Zionists. So to say that you're a liberal Zionist, definitely confusing. And I don't think that's a good move politically right now in America, where there are a lot of people who sympathize with the Palestinian population and what they're going through right now. And now with this war in Iran, they feel a lot of sympathy for those in Lebanon, right? If Lander wins this primary over Goldman, it will show that your support of Israel will make or break if you win elections, especially in the Democratic Party. And if Lander wins, it will show that you can still get support from the Jewish community and still be critical of the Israeli government. And I think that's something that people need to understand. You can support the Jewish community and want the Jewish community to thrive and still be against the Israeli government and their occupation of the Palestinians, their genocide against the Palestinians, and now their bombing of innocent individuals in Lebanon. So you can do both. And if Lander wins, that will be proven. And the Democratic Party has to make a staunch decision on what their stance is on Israel. I think that definitely impacted Kamala Harris in 2024. And I think that if she was more firm against the Israeli government, I think that would have actually benefited her, because a lot of people voted third party because of her stance on Israel. So I genuinely think that the Democratic Party needs to come together and they need to make a decision. Are they going to support the Israeli government and support billions of our taxpayer dollars going to genocide? Or are they going to stand up against that and fight for the Palestinians who are being displaced, are being murdered, and genocide is committed against them? So the Democrats have to make a decision. So lastly, we're going to talk about Hillary Clinton, who delivered a blunt assessment of the 2024 presidential election, calling President Joe Biden's decision to seek re-election a terrible mistake for his legacy and the country. Speaking in Manhattan to the New Yorker's editor David Remnick, the 2016 Democratic nominee argued that the party's loss boiled down to a massive strategic miscalculation. Clinton asserted that if the 81-year-old Biden had chosen to pass the torch early on, a competitive Democratic primary would produce a candidate capable of defeating Donald Trump. She stated that whether the nominee had been Vice President Kamala Harris, a governor or a senator, anyone emerging from a standard primary process would have won in the general election. Clinton's remarks come amid ongoing finger-pointing within the party. Last month, the DNC released an internal autopsy of the election that faulted the Biden administration and the Biden White House for failing to properly position Harris, though it avoided a deep analysis of Biden's initial decision to run for president in the first place, right? Furthermore, Joe Biden, the former First Lady, recently admitted to CBS News that she feared that the president was having a stroke during his disastrous June 2024 debate performance despite initially pushing him to remain in the race. According to Clinton, the inner circle met post-debate calls for Biden to step down with total denial, and the president was only swayed after seeing devastating polling data. Biden ultimately exited the race in late July 2024, leaving Harris just 3 months to construct a national campaign. Clinton noted this timeline left Harris in an impossible position, unable to effectively separate herself from an unpopular administration without alienating Biden's core supporters. The comments also highlight the longstanding quiet rivalry between Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, who both served in the Obama administration. Biden has frequently expressed regret for not running for president in 2016, a race Clinton lost to Trump, and has maintained that he could have won both then and in 2024 if he had stayed on the ballot. Nor Joe Biden nor any of his representatives have commented on Hillary Clinton's remarks. Firstly, I totally agree with Hillary Rodham Clinton. Biden made a horrible mistake by running for re-election. He promised to be a traditional president, and he didn't keep that promise because I think it wasn't solely because he thought he could beat Trump. He was the only one that could beat Trump. He definitely thought he was the only one that could beat Trump. But I also think that he wanted to be president for his whole political career, right? And he wanted to have 2 terms because that's the normal path, especially for a successful president. You have 2 terms and you have this amazing legacy, right? So I think that Biden really wanted to just have a second term. I think that he thought he would be the only one to beat Trump, and I genuinely believe that he really, really wanted to serve 2 terms because of the look, because that's what you're supposed to do. When you're a successful president, you serve for 8 years. I also agree with Hillary Clinton that if there was a Democratic primary, whoever would win that primary would have beaten Donald Trump. The chaos of the Democratic Party during the pivotal election year contributed to Trump's victory in 2024. I will stand on that. Kamala Harris only lost by 2 million votes. She had 107 days to run for president. If there was an actual primary and the American people decided who they actually wanted to be the nominee, I believe that individual would have won the election, whether that was Kamala Harris or someone else. I believe that person would have won the presidency. And it's not surprising that Biden's inner circle was in denial after the debate, right? They were clearly in denial his entire presidency when he was physically and mentally declining, okay? They were clearly in denial then too, because why not 3 years ago did you tell Biden not to run for re-election? All of them were in denial, all of them. And it's truly a shame that it had to be because of devastating poll data that Biden dropped out the race, not because he knew that he was unfit to be president. He knew that he was physically and mentally declining. He knew that he was physically and mentally not the same as he was when he won the election in 2020. So why do you then run for president if you know this? You know your body. But it had to be because of polling data a month after your disastrous presidential debate. He should have announced that he was not going to continue his run for re-election the very same night of the debate. I'm not even going to give him until the next day. Right after that disastrous debate, his team needed to come together, come up with a quick speech for him, and he should have dropped out the race that night. But he didn't. It took him a month to do so because he didn't want Kamala Harris to be the nominee in the first place. That's why it took him so long. He did not support Kamala Harris. And it was really bad. But the DNC autopsy even showed that, right? The DNC autopsy, like I said, was horrible. But it showed that the Biden White House did not support Harris at all. It did not support her and did not give her any sort of chance to have the American people feel comfortable by her possibly being the nominee. She rarely did interviews, rarely did press conferences. She was in charge of the border, which ended up being the death of her in a lot of ways because a lot of people were critical of the border under Biden. They did not support her because they did not want her to be the nominee. I think that Biden picked her because she was a Black woman, because of the pressure of Black women for him to pick a Black woman as the vice president, which was the right thing to do. I'm glad that Black women did that, but you could just tell that Biden did not fully support Kamala Harris because she would have done way more during the Biden administration, and Biden would have felt more comfortable not running for re-election in the first place. And even though he did, he would have felt more comfortable dropping out immediately after the debate and not waiting until a month later. If he felt comfortable with a Harris presidency, he would have never ran for re-election, and he would have never waited a month. When he did run for re-election, he would have never waited a month after the debate to drop out. And it's the truth. It is the truth. Because if he never ran for re-election and there was going to be a primary, Biden, of course, rightfully should endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris, who was definitely going to run if it was just a normal primary. But to avoid all that, to avoid him looking bad, he decided to run for re-election for all of the reasons that I stated earlier, and also because he didn't have any faith in Kamala Harris. And I hate that Biden always says he would have won if he was the nominee, right? He's saying it about Kamala Harris when it comes to the 2024 presidential election. And he said that about Hillary Clinton in 2016. It's incredibly disrespectful to continuously say, well, I would have won if I was the nominee. And who does he say that about? He said that about two women, incredibly talented women candidates, Hillary Rodham Clinton and Kamala Harris. It's incredibly disrespectful. It's incredibly disrespectful. So I'm glad that Hillary Clinton spoke up about this because I want more Democrats to speak out against the decision that Biden made. The disastrous DNC autopsy did not do anything. Honestly, the only thing that it revealed is that Kamala Harris did not have any support, but that was the only thing it really did. So I want more Democrats to speak up about what happened in 2024 in a way that isn't completely lying, like what Joe Biden did. Joe Biden writes a book and completely lies. Hillary is speaking up about it as this is a mistake that Joe Biden made, and we cannot repeat this. We cannot repeat this. That is something that Democrats need to hear. Not Joe Biden lying and saying that Biden is this healthy, perfect person. No. So I'm happy that Hillary spoke up about this, and I hope more people speak out about what really was happening behind closed doors when it comes to Biden and his decision to run for re-election, because Democrats can learn from this. Democrats can learn from this in the future, and I support Democrats learning from their mistakes so that Democrats can win against Republicans. So I support that. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Power, Policy, and Progress with Madison Maynard. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. We will be back next Tuesday. We will be discussing more political news, analysis, and conversations about issues shaping our nation. In the meantime, please make sure to follow me on Instagram at Power, Policy, and Progress Podcast. Please follow me on TikTok at Power, Policy, Progress Pod for online content. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please follow, subscribe, and rate the podcast 5 stars, preferably to show your support. And of course, join the conversation. Leave a comment and let me know your thoughts on today's topics. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening. I'm Madison Maynard, and you're listening to Power, Policy, and Progress. I'll see you next time.